Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And here in Beverly, it's budget season. And to help us understand what's going on and where we're going and what's the process from here on out, we have with us the president of the City Council, Julie Flowers. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much, George. Thanks for having me back.
Yes. And this is TBR, and I'm your host, George Binns. So, the mayor gave you the final budget Monday
Yes.
night,
Yes.
and the process of evaluating it goes on for some time. You mentioned when we were talking about this that there's going to be several meetings with the department heads giving their specifics, and how often are these happening?
Yeah, that's a great question, George. Thanks for asking it, because I definitely hope that members of the public can, if they're interested, if they want to follow along, people can watch on BevCam like they're doing now,
Yeah.
and or they can join us in the council chambers. These are all open to the public. So you're right, the mayor presented the budget Monday. That gives just sort of a brief overview, and then it does kick off, as you said, budget season.
Yeah.
And so our Finance and Property Subcommittee actually sort of hosts these meetings, which means that Councillor Feldman will be chairing them. She's the chair of that subcommittee. But you really will see the whole council there, their committee of the whole. And they start tomorrow, Thursday, at 6 p.m. So they're an hour earlier than our usual council meetings, which I mentioned just because if people are used to when the council meets, I don't want them to miss. And then they run through June, basically Thursday and then Tuesday, Thursday, and then that's sort of the schedule is the Tuesday, Thursday at 6, except for if folks are interested in hearing the night that the Beverly Public Schools and Essex Tech come and present their budget and talk with us about their portion of the budget. That's actually on Wednesday, the 17th at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
So that's the only one that will fall on a
So
Wednesday.
this shows up on the city's calendar if you look.
Yep, it's on the city's calendar,
It's in
and
details, yeah.
yep, agendas are posted on the
Now,
agenda
are
center.
these meetings open for the public for comment, or are they strictly presentations by the various organizations?
They're not for public comment. It's another great question. They are conversations with the department heads and the council, so it's the chance for the council to really dig in, ask questions, and come to understand better about what's in the given department or why, or what's not there and why. But there is a public hearing on the budget, and that would be the time for folks to give public comment on the entirety of the budget. That's on June 22nd. And so then people can come to that meeting, sign up to make a comment, and that's when they can comment.
So the process goes on, and I guess all the preliminary information is got a little interest in town.
Yeah.
And I guess the trash fee fiasco that's going on, that's one of the major drivers. And I guess depending on how you look at it, I did some analysis based on some communities around, and $450, $425 is not totally unreasonable if you base it on like Wyndham's pay-as-you-throw. You make a guesstimate of how many bags of trash you're going to throw out in a given week. And I think the real issue is that there shouldn't be a trash fee at all, because way back when, the city had its own crew and did it. Then slowly this thing's been creeping into the system where, well, instead of having our own crew, we'll hire an outside firm to do it. Assume that it was cheaper for doing it that way. And not sure what happened to that funding that was paying for the trucks and the equipment. And all of a sudden, in 2012, I think it was, I think it was Mayor Scanlon said we need a little help with the trash fee, and created the fee.
Yes.
So that's the first time they went around Prop 2.5 and got a fee. And one of the things I'm concerned about, and I think this is one of the issues that comes up that's not thrashed at enough, is that everything is a fee now. And that $4.25 fee that the mayor proposed wasn't the end of it, because everything else you want to throw or get rid of, that doesn't fit within the narrow guidelines of what the trash company will pick up. It's got another fee associated with it. So I think this is one of the issues that really needs to be considered. Do we really need to go around Prop 2.5? Because the real issue, I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, is the school committee budget was increased last year was either 8 or 9%, depending on what piece of paper you look at. And then this year, the school committee budget is up another 5% kind of thing. So the school is one of the major drivers. And I think this is one of the issues, and I think we talked about it before, that technically the city council can't do much with the budget. They have to pretty much accept what the school committee presents and or just arbitrarily cut it.
Right.
So it's not a very intelligent process, but that's the way it is. So what are you guys going to do about some of these issues that are driving the budget, and then also going around Prop 2.5? Because if we had a Prop 2.5 override attempt, we would get a good story on why we need it, what's it for, and therefore. And I think that's getting missing in the whole process.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot there to unpack, which makes sense because I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning when you just said, I mean, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the city, and so you captured, I think, really well a lot of it. So, one of the things that you mentioned is the increase in the school budget, and that is certainly, that's a piece of it. And what I wanted to sort of add to that is it's that and the city side of the budget, just the costs of everything rise, and we definitely see that in our household budgets.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's a big piece of it, and I think you and I have talked about this, but structurally, the pressure that happens when costs are increasing well above 2.5% year over year, and municipalities' main source of revenue is capped at 2.5%. And on the whole, I just want to say that, I think the 2.5% levy limit that the state imposes, on the whole, it's a good policy. It really creates a policy where municipalities can't just arbitrarily, as you put it, be raising taxes year over year over year. What it's doing at this particular moment is creating structural pressure, not just in Beverly, but across the state. So that's sort of cold comfort to look across the state and see that there's municipalities everywhere dealing with this budget gap and having to make significant cuts. Every municipality is handling it differently, but I've seen some with devastating cuts that I'm sure that they don't want to make, but everyone's trying to close this structural gap. And I say a structural gap because I think there's a difference between just gross overspending, mismanagement, and a structural deficit. And I think what we're looking at in Beverly really is a structural deficit where we've got costs that are rising, revenue that rises at 2.5%, and then trying to figure out how we close that gap, particularly at a time where state aid is also crunched down. There's a lot of reasons for that, and at a time where we've lost some of the money that flows through the state from the federal government. So again, it's not problem solving in any way, and I don't pretend it is, to say we're not alone in this when we look at our neighboring communities across the state. It's maybe just helpful for context to know Beverly's not alone, and what we need to do then is figure out what are the best solutions that we can make here in Beverly. And you rightly pointed to the challenge of balancing fees and the burden on residents, and I said to someone yesterday, I think if we were being honest, not one of us wants to put more burden on residents. So it's figuring out how to work that careful balance of how each of us who live here contribute to be able to get the services then, because really everything we contribute comes back to us in the form of services.
Yeah.
And how we recognize the very real stress on residents and their budgets, because that's real and those pressures are real. And so how to balance that. And then where the cuts are going to come. Because one of the things that came out of our financial forecast process earlier in the year, and that you and I have talked about, is there is this balance of, okay, how do you fund what you need? But when it's really crunch time, where do you make cuts? And every cut, somebody in the city will feel every cut as some kind of a service touch point. So it's just thinking about how do we minimize the impact. So that's the process I think you're going to see happening here in Beverly, is just in our conversations in the Finance and Property Subcommittee, is really trying to dig into where are the responsible cuts that we just are going to have to make. How can we balance the burden on residents, but also trying to figure out how we can contribute, each of us, for the services that we receive, and where do we go from here? So you mentioned the trash fee, and I think what you saw happen in the city council, where the original proposal of $425 for the default fee and then a step down of $285 for the smaller barrel, getting amended to possibly, we haven't taken a final vote, but possibly $300 for the default fee. That's for a 65-gallon trash cart.
Yeah.
A step down of $200 for a 35-gallon trash cart for folks who opt into that, and a possible step up. We did hear from residents with lots of different reasons, some of whom said, in my household we have really severe medical issues, and so with that comes more waste, and so we really can't necessarily do a 65-gallon. So a step up option to the 95-gallon recycling size bin. You get 95 gallons for your recycling sort of by default, and that doesn't change the fee. It really is, it's the waste size that changes the fee, but a possible step up for $400 to a 95-gallon trash cart. And so part of what I saw happening in that conversation was the council trying to come together around a compromise, hearing from residents about the stress, understanding that any reduction that we make from the original proposal would result in cuts, and so thinking responsibly about how we balance all of that. And so it seems likely, but I can't say for sure because it takes 2 votes to set an ordinance, and the trash fee is set by ordinance. It's just how it was originally put in place. You're right about it being during earlier administration. And so I can't say for sure what the final vote will show, but right now that's where we're sort of landing in this compromise spot.
And the point you made about people recognizing that things are costing more, just looking at your household budget kind of thing. And one of the things that I don't see, and I think needs to be more transparent, is when you have a problem at home, you have to make cuts. And something isn't going to happen. So the nice to do things are the first on the list of, well, we have to put that one off to another year, or maybe never do it. And I think this gets to be the situation where Beverly doesn't have a revenue problem, it's got a spending problem. And some of the things we ended up with, like we own the dollar store now. And I think that was kind of an impromptu decision that, well, we don't want a 5-story building downtown, and we don't want to give up the parking space, and we're going to need some place to put the people while we renovate City Hall. And they jumped into it. Well, it turns out, it's not that good an option for renovation because there's I think, asbestos problem.
Yes. Yeah. It's an older building, so you're right, definitely.
Yeah, so
asbestos.
that just jacks the price up from a $200,000 guesstimate on renovating it to something like $1 million. So that's not good. And that raises another question: that okay, if we go ahead with the City Hall renovation, we're still going to have to get some temporary space. Is that in the $30 million budget, or is that another add-on? And I think it's this kind of, well, what about that? Well, that's an add-on and that. So we end up with a spending problem that doesn't seem amicable to a solution kind of thing. So I would like to hear more about what's the total story.
Sure.
And I think this is what would make people a lot more comfortable that, for instance, on the trash fee, going to an automatic pickup usually sets you back about, not set you back, it saves you about 30 to 50% because you're not paying for individual crew people picking up the barrels and throwing them in the back of the truck. It's just one driver. And you don't have the medical expenses that happen with people manhandling a bunch of stuff. And I think you mentioned that the was put out to bid.
Yeah.
Did we see a significant improvement over what Reliant was going to propose for the coming year versus the one they picked? And I think if we get that kind of information, it's said, oh, that ain't such a bad deal after all.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, George. And so I don't have the exact numbers, but I can get them for you.
Yeah,
We're happy to put them out. But I can tell you, and I think you're right, this needs to be something that gets talked about so that the public can hear. You're exactly right. The more people know, the more we all know, the more we can then sort of make our own decisions about how we feel about those things. And we may not, in a city of 42,000 people, it's unlikely we'll ever all agree. But I think you're absolutely right that giving people more information versus less, it's always my preference. And I think it's a good default position for a municipality. So I'm glad that you asked about the RFP, which was the request for bids for the trash hauler. And it's interesting because for cities and towns, usually for procurement for anything, right, there has to be a public process where a request for bids goes out and bids are received. The state doesn't actually require that for trash contracts, sanitation contracts, which is just sort of an interesting tidbit that I didn't know.
Yeah.
But we did one anyway, which I think, to me, I'm glad we did. I think that's best and better practice. And so I'm happy to get you the exact numbers. What we heard, what we've been told, what we've been talking about is that Republic, our current hauler, was willing to continue a contract with us, but for significantly more than their current contract.
Yeah, they had a big strike and they got a settlement in there.
Yeah, and then and for significantly more than the contract we're going with, which is with a new hauler, Casella. People have probably seen their trucks around. They've been working in our area and working as a private hauler in our area, and currently pick up, I believe, in Salem, might be our closest neighbor using Casella. So there was also another hauler that did give us a bid for continuing with rear load trucks versus automatic, and that bid was actually higher. So this is kind of to your point, George. That bid came in higher than Casella's automatic pickup, and I think that's sort of where you were going, sort of thinking about would rear load, would employees on trucks the way we're doing it now, would that in fact be more? And in the bid that we got, it was more. There's not many haulers willing to do that model anymore, for lots of reasons, and you named one. Safety for employees even is one that they'll name. And so we had known that our last contract with Republic was pretty much the last one that would be non-automated pickup with anybody. They had been very clear, we're not going to do another. So we knew the shift to automatic pickup was coming. One of the things driving cost up for all of the haulers, and of course, they're taking that cost and then sort of transferring it back to their contracts, which transfers back to the ratepayers, and you're right about that. Yeah. But the cost to get rid of our waste is also one of those costs that's just exponentially rising.
The tipping fee keeps going up.
The tipping fee keeps going up, and part of it is that in Massachusetts, our landfills are filling up. So what they do with our waste is a more costly endeavor. So I think when people are trying to think through all of the pieces of this, there's so many pieces, but I think that one's one we haven't talked much about, which is just it is a problem, and we're going to see a problem year over year with sanitation contracts with any hauler because we have a problem with waste in Massachusetts.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems, and
Yeah.
I think this is the situation that gets people a lot of wound up.
Sure.
That all you do is get a number, 425.
Right. And not the story.
And no story behind it, and no details about is it a good idea or a bad idea. And I think we're facing the same sort of thing with the renovation of the city hall. It was 18 million once, then it was 25 million, then it got to be 35, now it's back to 30. And the city council just approved a $2 million startup cost thing. Is that part of the 30 million, or is that in addition to the 30 million?
That initial part has been, I think, estimated into the 30 million
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one that still bothers me is I was on the building commission for the middle school.
Yeah.
First number I got from the mayor on what the school was going to be was a $77 million middle school. Okay. We finally settled in and sold it and done it and paid for it at 109 million. So there is some sort of creep involved in these guesstimates that get finalized and, oh yeah, we really have to do this and so forth. And you start to wonder, well, is that really such a good idea to go ahead when, okay, 30 million is a big number, and if that creeps up by a comparable amount to maybe 35 million, we're perpetuating this problem year after year that we're going to have either cut or override.
I feel it's a little yes and no on that one, only because I think the complicating part in this piece of the story, and I love that you brought out the fact, George, that when people just get numbers and we don't do a good job telling the story, it really leads to a lot of frustration. I think you're exactly right. And that's why I'm always so grateful to have a chance to come on a show like yours and you and I can talk, because it's one more way that together we can talk through some of what is the story, and then people can decide, for themselves how they feel about it next. But with a project like City Hall, besides the $2 million, it's really being built into our debt structure, which is this part I feel like is where you get sort of into this like really nitty gritty of how municipal budgeting works. But the debt line item isn't part of our operating budget, and so it's obviously money that we do bond for and we pay back. So I'm not suggesting that it's not money in and out of the city in any way. But what I am thinking about is the way that even in our household budgets, we sort of understand that we have different kinds of money. And if possible, we try not to sort of crisscross them. And what I mean by that is if we set aside money for like a mortgage payment, something we're paying into to eventually own, we would try hard. Doesn't always work because budgets can be really tight. We'd try hard not to shift that money over and use it on a monthly cost like our utility bill, because we know that we're putting that into something that's a longer term investment. The city's debt service kind of works the same way. And so it's built in such a way that it's a percentage of the total budget, but because we can bond and then pay off, bond and then pay off in a scheduled way, we're able to layer in different projects without having to go into that 2.5 levy that's working with our operating budget. What's hard about it, and I think the council, I feel like the council, I heard very forthright comments from councilors that I agree with, saying the optics and the timing of this City Hall project are terrible, and yet when you look at the different pieces, the facts of the story, there's a good reason to still go forward with the project, because once the debt capacity shrinks, if that money goes into the operating budget year over year, and then expenses rise, it would be very hard to pull that back out. It's basically going to be then a year-over-year operating budget chunk. And what happens then is we lose the ability to put another project in. Yeah. And so it looks hard to understand. It looks bad to say we're going to spend all this money on City Hall and we're talking about a structural deficit. And I definitely understand why it's very hard to put those two things in balance.
Yeah.
I think for me, the thing that really was the prevailing thought that I ended up supporting the City Hall project was that notion of maintaining some level of the debt service at the set percentage. We've managed to be very stable in our debt service in Beverly, and that allows us to do things without jumping into the operating budget. A good example of what can happen if you don't have that capacity is the conversation that was taking place in Salem with Salem High School.
Yeah.
So another option municipalities can take is what Salem did, which is you can ask for a debt exclusion, which is a form of 2.5 override.
Yeah.
So it goes to a vote, and Salem voters did vote to do it. But I think it's sort of just a matter of, do you have capacity that you've built in your budget to do it without needing to go to a debt exclusion 2.5 override? And in Beverly right now, the answer is yes. And this is not I'm not digging at Salem either. It's just, I think it's a contemporary example if people are trying to figure out what would the difference be. And the difference would look like, can we sort of layer it into our debt cycle and then something gets paid off and comes out of the cycle at the time that something else layers in. That's sort of been our strategy. Or when we do individual projects, do we go to voters and ask if they would vote to approve it? And that is a different strategy that some communities use. And so just if people are trying to wrap their heads around what's the difference, I offer that as one example.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on,
There is a lot going on.
and we've had a half hour of fun thrashing at it.
That
I
flew
know.
by.
So we need to have some more discussions, and as
Yeah.
we get smarter, because I think the basic issue is it isn't that bad. But when all you get is bits and pieces
Yes.
in shocking numbers,
Yes. I agree.
it gets people, what happened?
Yeah.
Nervous. So
I agree with you,
makes
George.
things different.
Yeah.
So we ought to have another discussion. You could do this some more and continue on,
Yeah.
especially after you got smarter with what the various department heads have to say about actually what they're doing and where's the money going,
Yeah.
and what's getting done, what's not getting done.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to be back. I know we're going to continue our conversation, so thank you for continuing that with me.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching this evening. And if you've got a comment, my email address is in the credits. Send me a message. And if you've got a longer comment, there's room for you here at the table. And thanks again for watching, and stay tuned. This is going to be an interesting season.